I spent 3 years in total working with Roger at Bitcoin.com. It's still one of the best work experiences that I have had personally. So the thing about Roger is he's always a really forthcoming, really decent, really good guy, and will do it whatever he can to work with you.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 187. I'm talking to Sterlin Lujan, who is an author, mostly in the cryptocurrency space. He's been involved with cryptocurrency since 2013. We're going to talk about some of the things that Roger Ver has been saying about the hijacking of Bitcoin. And unfortunately, Roger's in jail right now, so let's show our support for him. And another good piece of good news, though, is that Aria de Mezzo, who is one of the Crypto Six that we talked about on this show earlier, she's now in a halfway house. Looks like she's going to be free pretty soon, so that's good news. But how are you, Sterlin?
Yeah, brother, I'm doing really well, Chris. Glad to be here and talk about this, given the unfortunate circumstances of the events we're discussing, though.
Yeah. So how'd you first get into cryptocurrency, Sterlin?
Yeah, that's always a really great question. So I'm going to give you it's a bit of a longer version, but it's important because I don't get to talk about it very much. So in 2009, I was arrested for possession of MDMA and cocaine, approximately 300 to 500 milligrams of MDMA. I'm not sure. It was a lot of pills. And the result of that was I thought I was going to go to prison for 40 years. I ended up getting really lucky and hiring an amazing, greasy, smarmy attorney. And he was able to wrangle a deal for me where I ended up getting 10 years of deferred adjudication probation. But that experience was transformative for me. And as a result of that, I started questioning the nature of the system. Right, getting put through the criminal justice system in the U.S. will teach you very quickly how broken, corrupt, and morally bankrupt that system is. So as a result of that experience, I started reading anarchist philosophers, thinkers, and economists. I read Murray Rothbard's book, For a New Liberty. And this was around the time I was waiting to go to court. It took a year to go to court. This was in 2009. I processed that book, very clearly remember chapter 3 called The State, and then basically Rothbard talking about the state as a parasitic organization. I was like, this makes perfect sense. So that experience tied with this research I did turned me into an anarchist. And now you're probably wondering, well, what's the purpose of this? This turned you into an anarchist. How does that relate to cryptocurrency?
Yeah.
So after I learned about those ideas, I of course, after I got probation, this is circa 2009, and then I was on probation for 5 years. So around 2013, I was continuing my studies of anarchism, and I went into a Reddit forum where these guys were talking about cypherpunks and crypto anarchism. So I came into contact with some of the early Bitcoin developers and people talking about Bitcoin and how it could be used as an instrument or a tool to undermine the state apparatus and generate more financial freedom for ourselves. So I was immediately a fan. I started talking about Bitcoin as a result in 2013. And then in 2015, I went to PorcFest for the first time. Actually got to meet Lynn Ulbricht for the first time at that event. And more importantly, I got to spend and use Bitcoin, right? So everybody was talking about Bitcoin and crypto, especially because Lynn and her talk did with Ross, and then the importance of it as a general tool for undermining the state and being able to just grant ourselves the ability to store value and to spend money without the awareness of the state apparatus. Of course, during that time, a lot of us thought that Bitcoin was more anonymous, right? Or at least we referred to it as pseudo-anonymous. It's really barely even that these days. But I decided to go all in on Bitcoin. I went back home to my wife and said, we're going full into Bitcoin and crypto. So we invested around that time to 2015 and also started working in the space full time. Started working with Roger actually at Bitcoin.com in 2015. So
So you worked for Roger Ver, yes. So, and of course, 2013, Bitcoin was about all there was, right?
Yep. I don't even think Litecoin was around yet. Memory serves.
Yeah, well, Litecoin was the first altcoin that lasted.
Yeah.
And I think it was already trying to address some of these issues because people thought Bitcoin was too slow in this, so they wanted to make a coin that was faster. So yeah, just wondering when the first time you bought Bitcoin, how much did it cost?
Let's see, what was the price in 2015? I want to say it was around $400 or $500, maybe
Okay,
$500.
$500. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not going to ask what your situation is. I'm just curious to know. It's definitely one of those interesting things that we've all seen happen. And of course, this is not financial advice. This is not tax advice. This is not legal advice. We'll put that out right now since we're. But so you started working for Roger back then. So, and Roger also had an interesting record too, because apparently he spent time in jail for selling fireworks.
Yeah, I think
a highly regulated industry, but yeah. Of course, by then, of course, that was also too. Roger had already renounced his citizenship by then, right?
so. That was, yeah, I think that was before he renounced his citizenship. That was the precipitating event that led to him to renounce his citizenship, because he ended up spending, I think it was a year in prison for selling fireworks, and it had to do with some silly law where the fireworks went across state lines, so it counted as sales of some kind of explosives, basically, in accordance with the law, quote unquote.
Yeah. There's a lot of laws that I don't think people are aware of that just involve anything. You took beer across state lines. You took, it's and a lot, probably people don't even realize what's going on. So anyway, so you went to work for Roger. So what was the state of the community back then? I mean, obviously there weren't as many people involved as there are now, but what was the attitude? What was the general consensus among Bitcoiners of the time? Because I think I knew about Bitcoin back then, but I was always somewhat reluctant just because I'd seen other things come and go like Bitcoin. But yeah, so what was your impression at the time?
Yeah, sure. I wanted to just make a quick comment of what you said about people not knowing, what the laws are, and people potentially getting arrested for something they didn't even know was illegal. So Harvey Silverglate wrote a book called 3 Felonies a Day, basically saying that everybody commits, 3 felonies. I thought that was funny you mentioned that. It's so true. Yeah. So Bitcoin in 2015 was really an interesting time, because this is around the same time when people really started thinking about the fact that Bitcoin was not scaling. It wasn't able to scale to the masses, so it can be used for what its intended purposes was, per the white paper, which is as peer-to-peer electronic cash. And the solution that Roger, among a number of different people, started discussing was the idea of raising, at least an initial solution, raising the block size limit on Bitcoin, which would have allowed for more transactional throughput. Right now, there was a lot of pushback in the community. I say a lot, but it was really split pretty evenly, right, between big blockers and people who wanted to keep the block small. But there was pushback from people who made the claim that if you raise the block size limits, then you squander decentralization, you thwart decentralization, and then the network becomes more decentralized. Of course, Roger made the case, and a lot of people did, that hardware developments, increases in bandwidth, technological development, i.e. Moore's law, the law of accelerating returns, etc., that naturally we will be able to accommodate technologically growth in block size, right? So I'm personally still of the mindset that growing the block size was a fine way to scale Bitcoin. I think just recently, Bitcoin Cash actually introduced a dynamic or adaptable block size limits that allows the block sizes to grow and contract in relation to market demand, which I think is a really brilliant solution. And I think even during the time in 2015, people were talking about that. But bird's eye view, the Bitcoin ecosystem was pretty tumultuous, because that's during what we would call the block size war. So I spent a lot of my time at bitcoin.com writing about this, talking about it, and trying to help promote and push the idea that we should actually be scaling Bitcoin as peer-to-peer cash to as many people as possible.
Yeah. let's assume you're talking to somebody who knows almost nothing about computers at all. How does block size impact this issue? What is block size? What all does this mean that you're talking about?
Yeah, so all Bitcoin is a distributed ledger, right? Banks use ledgers just to keep track of the transactions so that so that they don't lose track of their balance, so that somebody can't steal their money. It's all for documentation purposes. So on Bitcoin, the blockchain is literally a chain of blocks, right? If you think about it just a bit abstractly, each block contains that transaction data.
Yep.
It's the ledger, right? So the problem is that this block has a megabyte limitation. It can only carry so many transactions, and when it gets full, then of course you have to move on to the next block. And that takes time, right?
Yes.
And it also creates more. When it gets filled, also it creates a fee market where if you're trying to conduct a transaction on the Bitcoin network, it becomes more expensive, kind of like a fee market, so that you can try to get your transaction included in the block. So expanding the block obviously allows more transactions and cheaper transactions to process through the blockchain. And I hope that helps. It's really just about limitations in storage capacity.
Yes.
For data.
So it might be like if you took a novel that was a book that was small, and then you made the book bigger, and then you made all the pages bigger, so you'd have more words on a page, but then you naturally wouldn't need to have as many pages in the book.
Yeah, that's
right.
The
same number of words. Yeah, so that's and that makes sense because you would expect hard drive and all this other computing power to get better, and also what exactly can you tell us about Roger? I mean, for people who don't know, who have any idea who Roger Ver is, that's
perfect direction.
Who is Roger Ver?
Perfect direction to take the conversation, Chris. We really want to know who the human Roger Ver is. So I spent 3 years in total working with Roger at Bitcoin.com. It's still one of the best work experiences that I have had personally. Roger, so the thing about Roger is he's always a really forthcoming, really decent, really good guy, and will do whatever he can to work with you. He, in my opinion, always had integrity, always had honesty, and try to do the best thing for his business. Of course, Roger has also been known for his shrewdness, his sometimes a little bit of a lack of emotional acuity, where he would, and I think this largely stems from his passion of cryptocurrency and Bitcoin and wanted to promote his vision. But I think on the whole, getting to know Roger personally, and I spent a lot of time having sit down discussions with him. Had dinner with him at least a couple of times. Most of the times they were in groups, but he pretty much always paid for dinner, right? He always was open and having conversations about all kinds of things. He's just a generally receptive person. He was always just very kind. So I've really, my time, I couldn't express any more of how great of a person he was to work with and how just good of a person he was in general. And I think a lot of people know, even if you didn't know him behind closed doors, he gave a lot to the cryptocurrency community. He was one of the first investors of very important cryptocurrency companies like Kraken, blockchain.com. I think even Ripple he invested in as well. And he helped a lot of people on a personal level. I think he ended up one time giving quite a bit of money to Andreas Antonopoulos. And of course, there's always some critiques of him and his personality and handling situations around this stuff, but he was always very giving and a very good person, and he's always meant well. And I think the last most important thing I want to mention is that he was always a staunch defender of human freedom and liberty, and always trying to do everything in his power to generate and create and cultivate as much freedom and human liberty, especially economically, as possible for everyone.
Yeah, and I believe Roger had already had some successful startups before he got into crypto, right?
Yeah, that's right. The main one that people probably have heard of is called Memory Dealers, which was a computer hardware seller. I'm not sure the details of how that worked, but that's what it was called, Memory Dealers.
Yeah, so by then, I also remember, when they had the GoFundMe for Nathan Freeman, he gave a lot of money to that. Nathan Freeman, of course, was the one of the organizers of the Anarcho Polko conference, which was really, it was always. I think it was always been more of a crypto conference than an anarchist conference. But yeah, that's your impression of Roger. Yeah, and of course, he's also called Bitcoin Jesus, or as he like to say, I'm the Johnny Appleseed of Bitcoin. But yeah, so
that's right. He actually really did not like the name Bitcoin Jesus because, and kind of ironically with the situation now, he always said that the Bitcoin Jesus name didn't really suit him well because look what happened to Jesus. In the end, of course, he was crucified by the Romans, right? And now this is why. So Johnny Appleseed of Bitcoin is what he did enjoy more. That's correct.
Was there much? I assume there wasn't much of a what was it like, with a regulatory environment back then? Were people still just buying Bitcoin from ATMs, or were you going to exchanges and just buying it, or how'd that all work out?
Yeah, it was around the time.
I don't think the feds were paying as much attention to it back then as they are now.
Yeah, that's correct. It was around the time when they really started to look at it and start paying attention. I think the IRS was one of the first organizations to give to start creating some laws or regulations around Bitcoin for tax purposes by calling it a property rather than a currency. So yeah, I think, but other organizations like the SEC hadn't really got involved in looking at everything quite yet. So what very much was still the quote unquote Wild West. And I think a lot of people still thought they had more freedom to do whatever they want in crypto without any kind of ramifications or repercussions in terms of the US government going after them. So I do think that is certainly the case. Things were a lot more free, but also people were, everyone already had the idea, or most people did, that the feds are going to start looking more at this and they are going to start trying to go after people who try to conceal something on chain or try to commit some quote unquote crime. And we'll probably get into more of the philosophy of the legalese and the nonsense around this. But yes, people did have a bit more of a feeling of financial freedom on crypto early on.
Yeah, not really. And of course, what were some of the exchanges that were around back then, around now? I know, Mount Gox had already came and went, right? But you talked about how Roger helped get Kraken started, and some of the others are.
Sorry, continue.
Yeah, and Ethereum, I think, was out in 2015 too. I don't know.
Yeah, 2015 or so. That's right. One of the only exchanges in the very early days, of course, was Mt. Gox. And speaking of Roger's case, I'm pretty sure that was the exchange that he would have had to conduct a trade on if it had not already. I forget the exact time frame of how everything happened, but before it collapsed, there was very few places to do a Bitcoin trade. Right, there was no Coinbase at the time that was functional for these type of trades. So yeah, it was super early days in crypto. Very little you could do in terms of transactionality, whereas now there's an exchange basically everywhere you look.
Yeah, and he was living in Japan for a while too, which is very interesting. So, where do you think there were maybe some signs of trouble of Bitcoin getting hijacked? Because you probably can look back now and think maybe there were these signs. I've heard different theories. I haven't read Roger's book yet, but I probably should get onto that sometime.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I haven't had a chance to read the book either, but I was there to experience what happened, so I have a good idea of what he's going to say. So the first signs, I think, of Bitcoin being hijacked was all the censorship that was starting to happen in the Bitcoin ecosystem. So the Bitcoin Reddit, I think our Bitcoin, anybody who spoke up about scaling the Bitcoin blockchain, anybody who talked about alternatives to the Bitcoin scaling problem and advocated for solutions, especially around extending the block size or having adaptive block sizes, those people had their whatever their message was censored, and sometimes they were just booted from the Reddit forums. So it was a heretical form of discussion that if you initiated it, you could be booted or censored. And I think this also happened on bitcoin.org as well, but there are a few primary places, and there were very few actually primary places where people were talking about the scaling debate, and it was on Reddit, it was on bitcoin.org and the forums. So you really couldn't say anything about scaling the blockchain then, or you would be censored. So it's really speaks to the power of censorship and how that can affect the way that people think about Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies and the direction that they should go, right? Because if we think about crypto or Bitcoin really being a financial instrument that has a consensus mechanism built into it, then there should be open discussion about the directionality and the optionality around how to scale that infrastructure. So that really didn't play out the way that we thought it did, because of course everybody was communicating on gate-kept forums and gate-kept sites where they couldn't speak their mind. So that's probably the first sign that some type of hijacking of Bitcoin was occurring.
Who was leading the censorship, or was it just somebody you don't really even know who was? If they were just anonymous accounts on Reddit, I mean.
Oh man, the name slips my mind. There was one primary target on Reddit that people talked about often during that point. I forget the name of the individual though at this time. So there was particular people they were blaming. I want to say the name was an anonymous name, but it was a common username on Reddit that was allegedly censoring people. But it really was like a large community that started to form around big blockers that started to censor people.
Since Vitalik Buterin initially started out as a Bitcoiner, do you know what his motivation was for going and starting Ethereum? Or
yeah, to be honest with you, I'm not really sure of his full story. I do think it had something to do with the idea of smart contracts and creating a global computer that can do more than Bitcoin can do, in the sense of being more than money. I think that was part of it, but I can't recall the full story.
Yeah, because you don't really hear much talk about smart contracts in the Bitcoin space, but you do hear people talking about it in some of the other, Ethereum, especially Cardano, which of course is another big one out there. And I believe, and of course, some of the founders of Cardano initially broke away from the Ethereum project, but anyway. So that what were you also seeing? Was it also starting to get to this? When did you start seeing this attitude that Bitcoin is the only real cryptocurrency and everything else is a scam attitude?
Yeah, that's an interesting comment, Chris, because it kind of happened gradually, but I want to say probably that started at least on a small scale in 2015, 2016, and then it incrementally started to increase over time. Of course, it's reached a fever pitch in modern times with all these folks, especially what we now call maximalists or monocoin maximalists in Bitcoin, talking about the idea that everything else that's not Bitcoin is a scam, which is just absolutely ludicrous, and in my opinion is an anti-innovation idea. Now, I do want to be fair to a lot of maximalists, in the sense that there have certainly been a lot of scams and a lot of frauds and a lot of nonsense happen in the crypto ecosystem, but that does not automatically mean or imply that all cryptocurrencies are a scam. And I think that's a nonsensical view, right? Because they lumped in Bitcoin Cash, right, which was the pinnacle of the scaling debate. What ended up happening was Bitcoin forked, of course, and Bitcoin Cash was created to maintain what's referred to often as Satoshi's vision, the idea that Bitcoin is peer-to-peer electronic cash. But I think after the Bitcoin Cash fork, that's when this mentality really ramped up, as people started claiming that Bitcoin Cash was a scam. And of course, this is an important thing to talk about. They accused Roger and Bitcoin.com early on of claiming that Bitcoin Cash was a real Bitcoin, and actually calling it Bitcoin early on. And I think that, to some admission, that probably wasn't the best, at least not the best marketing scheme to go on, because it received a lot of backlash, and this probably really ramped up even more this idea that everything that's Bitcoin is a scam. But I think Roger always had goodwill and good intentions, in the sense that Bitcoin Cash is more representative of the actual Bitcoin vision, of the actual Satoshi's vision, in the sense that it is peer-to-peer electronic cash. And that's how I've always thought about it as well. But the idea that Bitcoin Cash and some of these other cryptocurrencies that have been around a long time are scams is just absolute nonsense. And in a lot of layman's minds, people who are not interested in the cryptocurrency ecosystem, they still call Bitcoin a scam. Basically anything that's not fiat currency or government approved in their mind as a scam. So that really the word scam has become diluted and has lost its meaning. It's just become devoid of meaning now.
Yeah, and I think when most people will agree that there are a lot of scams out there, but with thousands of cryptocurrency projects, but certainly there are some out there that have legitimate purposes. And as we speak right now, Bitcoin dominance is at 54%, which means if you take the market capitalization of all the other cryptocurrencies in the world and put them all together, all the Bitcoin in the world is still worth more than that. It's been that way for a long time. I mean, I think Bitcoin dominance maybe went down to as low as 40%, but still Bitcoin is still unquestionably the number one cryptocurrency, but there's definitely a lot of competition out there, certainly enough competition to keep things honest. So yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. So who else were some of the early promoters of Bitcoin or other cryptos going on back then? I mean, there were some that you can tell us about that might have played a part in this or not. I mean, Satoshi had already been long disappeared by then, and we're still at a point where nobody really knows who he was. But who else was there?
Let's see. I'm going to be working on from memory here. I know that on the Bitcoin side, in terms of not scaling Bitcoin, he's still a huge voice in the space. Is Adam Back? Of course, Adam Back was responsible for Hashcash, which was instrumental early in I think preventing spam and there's some other technological elements of it for email, right? But Hashcash played part of the function in the creation of Bitcoin. But Adam Back has been a continuous proponent of not scaling Bitcoin, and to this day he still talks about it. So he was huge in the space on that side of the argument. And if you remember on Bitcoin Cash side, of course, you had Roger, you had people like Jihan Wu, right? Who is, I haven't really heard much of him publicly, but he was a very public proponent of scaling Bitcoin at the time and had made a lot of posts and had spoken at events. You had, this is a kind of a sad story because he ended up being a complete fraud. Remember, Craig Wright was early Bitcoin Cash proponent, then him and Roger had a falling out, and then he ended up just going completely fraudulent, calling himself Satoshi and trying to promote BSV.
Yeah, what is that? That is another thing. What is we could talk about the COPA lawsuit. What is the deal with Craig Wright anyway? What's he trying to accomplish, or what do you think he's trying to accomplish?
Yeah, so just to be clear, I think there was a recent. I'm going to start ahead a bit, and then I'll backtrack a little bit. But he recently lost a case in which he was claiming to be Satoshi, and it was basically decided that at least in the court, but I think in the court of public opinion, a lot of people in the crypto space already realize that he's not Satoshi. He was never able to prove that he was Satoshi by moving any of the funds that are in Satoshi's wallet, and has basically been outed as a fraud. Now, I think his motivations were probably purely financial, in my opinion. He wanted to claim that he was Satoshi, so whatever coin or project he was backing at the time, there would be more influence from his side, and he could stack his bags for those coins and get more people interested in it, because he then of course had defrauded everyone that he is Satoshi, and whatever his project is the real deal. So he's really trumping up those projects by calling himself Satoshi and probably filling his own bags at the time. And just from my memory and of seeing his posts and interacting with him online, the dude was completely arrogant, full of himself, was just the ugliest person ever to talk to. And really, I never really liked him or really cared for him from the very beginning. I always thought that there was something sketchy about him from the get-go, and that ended up, it looks like, being the case. But the sad thing is he probably ended up hurting Bitcoin Cash a little bit, because he was a proponent, and him and Roger kind of supported each other, and then they had a falling out in relation to the direction of Bitcoin Cash, and then Bitcoin Cash ended up forking into BSV, which was his coin that he supported, until of course he was found out as a complete total fraud. Now he's gone. I don't think there's we don't have to worry about dealing with him anymore, at least.
Yeah, there was also Bitcoin SV, and sometimes a bad proponent can be worse than anybody who attacks you directly. And you were talking about and and you were talking about Jihan Wu. He founded Bitmain, which of course is they do chips for Bitcoin mining. And again, to explain to the people who know nothing about this out there, Bitcoin mining is basically when you have a system that creates the blocks, basically does the work and uses the energy to create the blocks. And that's how we create Bitcoin to begin with. You create a certain number of blocks and then you get a reward in Bitcoin. So there is work involved and energy involved in producing Bitcoin. It's not that, and that's why it's considered a commodity and not a security, because you can't just wave a magic wand and print Bitcoin out of thin air like you print money out of thin air, or the way the companies print stock certificates out of thin air. There is some work involved. You got to pay with that. So when exactly was the split of Bitcoin Cash, though, from Bitcoin, or I should say the fork, I guess, really?
Trying to remember. I think it was in, I'm going to say 2016 or 2017. I can't remember the exact date and time. And I just want to clarify something. It's been a while since I've focused my attention purely on what's going on in the Bitcoin Cash ecosystems. I've mainly been focused on the privacy ecosystem recently, but it was around that time. And yeah, it was definitely what you would call a contentious hard fork. And a lot of people would say that the Bitcoin Cash side, quote unquote, lost. But I think, now what we're seeing in the space is that there is more and more people coming into the Bitcoin ecosystem who don't agree with the direction. They're starting to really talk about the scaling problems again. All that's returning and coming to the surface, and people are starting to say maybe the Bitcoin Cash people are right. And we see this through people trying to add different forms of value to the chain. So ordinals coming into play on Bitcoin. People like Paul Stork talking about drive chains. All this stuff is them trying to add additional value to Bitcoin, because there's been people in the Bitcoin space claim that, and you mentioned it earlier, the Bitcoin dominance is not where they would like it to be, right? These guys like to see Bitcoin dominance at 100%. If they genuinely believe that everything else is a scam, they want all the value to be in Bitcoin. But the thing that they don't see is that there is actual innovation happening outside of Bitcoin, right? In Ethereum, there's been way more innovation in some areas, right? Especially like in, just one example is DeFi gaming, right? There's really actual good games that are being played on the Ethereum chain that have brilliant use cases. But aside from that, these guys have admitted that all this extra value is going into these other projects that should be going into Bitcoin. So that's their reasoning for bringing ordinals, for bringing side chains up, and for trying to do all this other stuff in the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Yeah, well, in smart contracts, you have decentralized finance, or is often called DeFi. People usually just say DeFi, but I just want to explain that for people who don't know. And DAOs, which is distributed autonomous organizations. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things going on here that I think could be revolutionary, and there really aren't that many. I think also. You also have to realize that when you have a lot of arrogance in a community, you have people who have IQs of probably 110 or 120, but they think their IQs are 300. And other genuinely smart people don't want to work with people like that. So they go off somewhere else. And is it fair to say that there's really not as much talent now in the Bitcoin scene as part of other cryptocurrency spaces now?
My personal opinion is that's definitely likely the case. I think that the cadre of Bitcoin developers is actually probably pretty small, but I don't know. I don't want to speak out of turn. I do think that certainly a ton of talent has gone outside of the Bitcoin ecosystem. That's what I can see. There's a ton of talent that have gone into the network space arena in crypto. Another phrase for that is an autonomous political organization. There's a ton of people with interest in the privacy space now because of what's happened with all these recent cases that we've talked about. And I think there's even more that are going into some area of Ethereum where they're working on DeFi projects, or they're working in the GameFi space where they're developing gaming, as I mentioned. So yeah, I think there's a ton of talent out there that has probably moved away from Bitcoin just because of the limited scope of where they're their work is. But
Yeah.
that's not to say they still don't have talented people. But I think the talented people in Bitcoin are just hyper focused on that, that singular vision of Bitcoin now as digital gold. And this is something I think that's important that we mentioned. The vision of Bitcoin, as we've mentioned multiple times, and I talked about as peer-to-peer electronic cash. That was original quote unquote Satoshi's vision. But now they've actually moved away from that. Some people aren't even saying anymore that Bitcoin is peer-to-peer cash or should be used as a medium of exchange. Instead, it's digital gold. It's a cumulative store of value. Even Michael Saylor has publicly stated that it's who cares about the medium of exchange functionality. It's just digital gold, right? And that's it.
Yeah, and I've often, you occasionally see these people said this is why you never sell your Bitcoin, and I get real. I'm sorry, but every other area of investing understands that there's, it's buy low, sell high. You just don't hold on to it. And Sterlin, one question I've always asked, and I'd love to put this out to a lot of people: if you drop dead, in the next 3 hours, what happens to your crypto? Does you've got a wife? Does she know what your keys are? I suspect for a lot of these people the hodlers, the long-term hodlers, their crypto is just going to disappear when they die if they died tomorrow.
Yeah, I think that's a strong possibility. If there's other people in your life that don't know your keys, if you pass, right, if you die, then that money's basically gone. Now, something that I think is interesting to talk about, there are some tools and technologies out there that they have kind of what's called dead man switch, where you point out technologically you point out who your beneficiaries of your crypto are, and when you pass, they have the ability to access that, right? So there are tools where you can minimize that, but how many people in the space are actually using that? Who knows? This is a good point. There's already a ton of Bitcoin and crypto out there that is inaccessible, right? That is just dead crypto on the chain. And some of that has been the result of people passing. Some of that has been the result of just stupid accidents, right? Like the guy who threw his hard drive away with hundreds of Bitcoin or even thousands of Bitcoin on it before he knew what it'd be worth. And that's just gone.
Yeah. And I wonder how many of these stories are even true. Somebody talks about, a laptop or, you hear stories. I wrote down my keys on this little piece of paper and left it under my little girl's pillow, and then it wasn't there. And I still think that's one of the big issues for crypto to become. It's too easy to lose it. It's definitely too easy to lose. It's I don't know how they're going to address that problem, but if I send an email to somebody and I write down the address wrong, I get a bounce. But if I do that with crypto, the crypto just, the person says, "Hey, I didn't get the crypto," and it's gone. And I suspect somebody will figure something out with this.
Eventually. You're right. I think those dead man switch tools, those technologies are getting better. There's also some insurance schemes in crypto, I think, that have emerged that those guys will help you do similar things. So there's options out there, but maybe I'm generalizing here, but most people in crypto are very concerned about who they give any kind of access or knowledge about their cryptocurrency holdings to. So leveraging external entities to try to either manage their crypto or help them manage it in the event that something happens to them is probably kind of rare. I haven't seen the numbers on it, but that's what my gut tells me.
Your wife or your girlfriend, and they may not even know you have crypto, which is kind of the whole point. But then, but like I said, I don't know if they could develop something that's like email, because email is still very decentralized. It's you go out there and that was one of the beauties of the early internet, is it was all decentralized, and of course, but now email's almost been completely ruined by spam anyway, but we still have it. But, so we got into this. So then, the Bitcoin Cash, I mean, obviously Bitcoin Cash is still there, but, if you'd had but the price differences certainly changed. I mean, there's more money going into Bitcoin. When do you think Bitcoin started to attract people who really, is at this point that Bitcoin really started to attract people who really didn't share the original vision? I mean, you mentioned Saylor, which is very unfortunate, in my opinion, that he just says it's digital gold. But,
Yeah, so this is a good point. I think around this time, probably after the embers cooled a little bit on the scaling debate for the first time, 2017, 2018, people started talking
Yeah.
about ideas around Bitcoin being digital gold.
Yeah.
A few more institutional investors started to look at it. I think Elon Musk had changed his perspective on Bitcoin. People like that, right? Originally thinking it's a scheme or a scam, and then getting into it, becoming more interested. And it is, in my opinion, coincidental that around the time the narrative started changing around Bitcoin, a lot of these folks from the commercialized scene, the corporatized scene, the institutions started getting more into crypto, and of course that has in Bitcoin specifically, and that started ramping up. And then I think it's really interesting when just recently, as the firms like BlackRock and Grayscale came into Bitcoin, right? The ETF was approved by the SEC. So now Bitcoin truly is fully institutionalized. And here's the thing that I point out a lot, which makes Bitcoin even more suspect in terms of its use case as a way to destabilize the system or the dollar. Now all of this Bitcoin, a ton of Bitcoin's being held by these firms, right? Grayscale, MicroStrategy, which is Saylor's company, and BlackRock. So a lot of these traditional investors, instead of holding Bitcoin themselves, these firms are all holding it, and they're just holding the traditional financial instrument, right, or the futures contract for Bitcoin, and that's continuously putting more and more power and giving more and more money to Wall Street and by proxy the government in some different form. And that is not where we want to be in terms of helping to achieve the cypherpunk or the crypto anarchist vision that we're trying to achieve. So I think it really started 2017, 2018. All these different companies that are more mainstream started getting interested in it. Can't be a coincidence that the cash use case has been done away with, and now it's just some plaything for the financial elite.
Yeah, digital gold, although it still does have some applications, for example, to energy production and stuff like that. You hear about that, but and from what I've heard also, at least according to Aaron Day, we have cases where some organizations started accepting Bitcoin as payment, and then they stopped because it was just too much of a hassle to do that. Is that true too? Can you give me some examples of that happening?
Yeah, Aaron's exactly right. One of the examples that comes to my mind is Dell Computers. I remember pretty early on buying a laptop in Bitcoin, right? A lot of us in the early days when we were using Bitcoin before the scaling debate, right, really took off, right, in 2014, 2015. We thought it was going to be money, so everybody was spinning their Bitcoin. They were trying to buy things. There were people and companies spinning up Bitcoin wallets to accept Bitcoin at point of sale. And so Dell was just one company. I think that Steam, the popular gaming company, actually accepted Bitcoin at one time, and they no longer do as well. Maybe they booted something up recently, but
Steam,
there's been
is that related to Steemit or not?
No. This is like STEAM. It's a extremely popular gaming platform where you can download games and play on your computer. And they accepted Bitcoin at one point. But a ton of companies accepted Bitcoin. But then
Tesla, I believe, also was accepting Bitcoin for a while, and then they stopped accepting Bitcoin. Is that right? Or
what was the company you mentioned?
Tesla.
Sorry. Tesla. Oh, yep, that's correct. Yeah, they did. I think
a lot of fanfare about that. Yeah, so with if the transaction costs are so high, because I can go go online and buy $10 million worth of Exxon stock, maybe for for a fee of maybe $20 or something. I can't buy $10 million worth of Bitcoin for $20. There's no way. It's there's often jokes about all the fees that are involved with this, and I've said for a while, if you really want to make money in crypto, just start an exchange and just collect all these fees, and you can't lose as long as. And that's another thing. When I heard about Coinbase Coinbase is having to lay people have said, how are you losing money at this? All you're doing is collecting fees, unless you're doing something stupid. But where do you, and now we're getting to this point now too, though, where we're seeing them going after more people, and Ian Freeman, the Crypto Six. And that was apparently what inspired Aaron Day to start digging into this. Is that why did why was Ian Freeman, prosecuted just for selling Bitcoin? And I don't know. Maybe we should probably talk more about the Roman Sterlingoff case, though. I haven't had anybody talk about that, but can you tell us about
Sure.
Roman Sterlingoff? And always say their names,
Roman Sterlingoff, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So he was the founder, or I was going to say the alleged founder of Bitcoin Fog, and just recently, I want to say early this year, right? Maybe even last month? He was actually convicted for running Bitcoin Fog, and he was convicted on money laundering charges. And the feds claim that Bitcoin Fog was the longest standing running Bitcoin mixer built, quote unquote, for the purpose of facilitating financial crimes and especially money laundering in the use case or in the commission of other crimes as well. Now, the thing that's interesting about the Roman Sterlinov case is that, and I want to differentiate this too, especially with a case like Samurai Wallet, which I don't know if we'll have time to talk about today, but we certainly can get into it. The Bitcoin Fog was a centralized operation that he controlled, to my understanding. It was a purposely built mixer that he ran and managed in as anonymous a way as possible. Now, the thing about his case, when he was arrested at LAX, I believe, when he was first arrested and then charged with these crimes. The interesting thing is that all of the case was built against him using blockchain forensics, right? So anybody who's unfamiliar, blockchain forensics is one of the companies is Chainalysis, and what they can do is they have ability to cluster Bitcoin transactions and to trace Bitcoin transactions using a graph-like technology. So they can basically see because this is one of the big problems with Bitcoin too. It's not private at all. All the transactionality is completely transparent, and they can trace transactionality.
Yes.
So they use blockchain forensics to allegedly convict Sterlingoff of running Bitcoin Fog mixer. I think still the problem here is that now we have a situation where governments can, and this is the biggest thing was his case, where governments can use blockchain forensics purely for the conviction of a case. And that's pretty terrifying. They don't have to have any other existing evidence against you. Your hands technically can be completely clean, and they can go after you. So that case, a lot of people aren't talking about in terms of the precedent that it sets for blockchain analysis and blockchain forensics to be used solely in the conviction of somebody in the commission of a quote unquote crime.
Yeah, and really that is, as you pointed out, that's the case with Bitcoin. I mean, imagine, for example, that you had a chip on a $1 bill, and you could go onto some computer and find, okay, I gave this $1 bill to Sterling. Sterling gave this $1 bill to Roger Ver. Roger Ver gave this $1 bill to Juan Galt. Juan Galt gave the $1 bill to Vitalik Buterin. Vitalik gave the $1 bill to Michael Saylor, and Michael Saylor gave the $1 bill to Saifedean. I mean, that's kind of a scary thing to think about. It's
absolutely terrifying.
But that's the truth about Bitcoin, really, though.
Yeah, I think if there's one key takeaway from this call that we're having today, Chris, you're right, is that Bitcoin is broken in so many ways now, right? We talked a lot about the fact that it's not cash anymore. And not only that, it's the perfect surveillance tool because anybody and everybody can see what kind of transactions that you're using on Bitcoin. So it's definitely not recommended if you're trying to maintain privacy. Now, to be very clear on this point, I think that it is absolutely ridiculous that governments are going after people for leveraging crypto for privacy use cases, for anonymity enhancement. I think that privacy and even being anonymous is a human right. And my honest thing, I think KYC and AML, all that is absolutely antithetical to our goal of being as financially sovereign as possible. So it's all wrong from a base level, principle level perspective.
Yeah, well, there's always been this, KYC, of course, is know your customer, and AML is I forget what
anti-money laundering.
Anti-money laundering. Yeah, there's always been this. There's always been this attitude that because, well, we made something illegal, but making it illegal doesn't stop it. So we have to go make something else illegal, even though that's not in itself the crime. It's like, it's the same theory around gun control, will allegedly prevent murder, or, and that's an endless loop, really. It's, it's just ridiculous because there's no way you can stop it. Yeah. The know your customer stuff has been around since the 70s, and
yeah.
There's been a lot of anonymity with, lack of anonymity with banks. It used to be none of that stuff was recorded. And the fact that we have, computers and hard drive space and everything being so cheap, it's just gotten easier to log that. If you can imagine if you had to keep all those transactions on paper and, even before the use of spreadsheets, it's daunting to think about what that would be like in the past. But now it's just, it's easy to look it up now. And so they didn't have anything else on Roman. I know, this is something else too, though. If you're in a public place and you see something going on, don't leave your laptop. I mean, that's what's got Ross Ulbricht in trouble.
Yep.
He stepped away from his laptop long enough that an agent put a flash drive into the laptop, and that got all the stuff. And apparently it was like a man and a woman staging a fight, and he tried to be the white knight intervener. That got him. The anonymity. Let's just, for the layman's again out there, what's a mixer?
So a mixer is just a protocol or an application that allows you to conceal the source of funds of your Bitcoin, or conceal the source of where it comes from. So how it works is you put your Bitcoin into this protocol with a bunch of other people's Bitcoin, and it mixes those Bitcoins up, and then it outputs them to the address of your choice. And the way that it conceals the source of Bitcoin is that everyone's Bitcoin is the equal amount, right? So yes. It's very difficult to trace it back. Now, there is a case that some people have so mixers aren't perfect. People have been de-anonymized using mixers because they spend the change that's left over in their original wallet. If you spend the change, it's called toxic change. If you spend the change in your original wallet, then they can connect that to your mixed coins, and then they can find you out. So, it's pretty well known.
So a mixer would be like if 50 people all put $1 bill into a pot, and then they all later took out a $1 bill. Most of them probably wouldn't take out the same $1 bill.
Yep, that's right. And some mixers are the primary one that everyone uses, the one that was associated with Samurai Wallet's called CoinJoin. Yeah. And Wasabi Wallet also uses CoinJoin as well. And this is a completely decentralized mixer because and this is to distinguish this between Sterlin Lujan, whose Bitcoin Fog mixer was a mixer that was completely controlled by him. It was software owned by him, allegedly, right? Whereas something like CoinJoin is a decentralized protocol that anybody could use and spin up.
Yeah. What can you tell us about this recently Samurai Wallet case? Because this sounds very chilling too. I mean, somebody's now going to jail just for writing code.
Yeah, this is actually worse than the Sterlin Lujan case in terms of the precedent that it sets for all of us in crypto, and especially if we're privacy activists or privacy coders. So the Samurai Wallet, is just a wallet, right? And what they did was we talked about CoinJoin. They implemented CoinJoin into the Samurai Wallet, and so anybody could potentially download Samurai Wallet and use its CoinJoin functionality. Now, the developers of Samurai Wallet, these guys, I think Lonigan Hill, and I forget the other guys, Rodriguez is the other guy's name. These guys were also very outspoken critics publicly of the state and government, and they said some pretty controversial things. I can't recall something about I remember one comment saying the Russian oligarchs just come on and use the platform. You probably don't want to say that if you're hoping not to get targeted by the feds, but I think they genuinely believed that they were safe because they wrote open source code, right? And they provided software. Yeah. Now the feds are saying that they did run an ongoing enterprise or business because they did receive some fees back based on the code they wrote. But that's also an open question as to is it a common enterprise if you simply write code to reroute some of the fees back to your own wallet? That's kind of an interesting case, but the chilling effect is going to be massive because at the end of the day, it is open source software. anyone could still spin up and use CoinJoin. They can still have a wallet that has it integrated. So, but the feds are going to continue to claim that if you run any kind of front end, right, which they did, they had a front end for their server, for the website, and you download their wallet, that is enough for you to be engaging in some organized criminal conspiracy and money laundering, which is effectively what they're going after these guys for. But it's still, now anyone who's developing anything privacy centric, if you're not quote unquote decentralized enough, then theoretically they can come after you for just writing code for privacy tech. And I think, you know, Chris, you've alluded and hinted at this. Writing code is just, it's speech. It's free speech. It
is free speech.
Anybody should be able to write. Anybody should be able to write code, no matter what that code is. But there's, of course, obvious chilling effect as a result of this with this case.
Well, how would this have impact not just but on the overall greater software industry? Period. I mean, if you can go to jail for writing code, it's and you know, and Sterlin, this is a question I've been asking people lately. I mean, if you have a cryptocurrency project, should you get the heck out of the USA?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked this question. This is something I discuss and talk about a lot. So here's the
and where would you go?
Yeah, here's the simple answer is yes, but the more complex answer is, even if you go out of the U.S., the U.S. has what's called extraterritorial or extra-jurisdictional reach, where they can go after you. For instance, they got Roger in Spain, they got McAfee in Spain, they've got a bunch of people in Europe over time, right? They've even gotten people from Asia. So here's the thing. If you do leave the U.S., the first thing you want to consider is the place that you go. Does it have a diplomatic ties to the U.S. and does it have an extradition treaty with the U.S.? So if you do leave, you want to probably try to find a place that doesn't have an extradition treaty. But even then, even if they don't have an extradition treaty, that country, if they get a request from the U.S., they can just see that as a mere formality and they can still extradite you. It does not stop. I want to be very clear. It won't stop that. So if you do decide to go someplace, it needs to be a place that has poor diplomatic ties with the U.S. and non-extradition treaty. But also, those places are usually risky to go to in and of themselves. It'd be like going to Venezuela, right, which has poor diplomatic ties with the U.S. and which has no extradition treaty. Or somewhere like Vietnam is another one. But Vietnam also has a kind of a violent communist type government, even right now, right, where they're going after people who are speaking out against the government. So there's risks and rewards. But I still think places like Mexico that have a dicey relationship with the U.S. and they hate extraditing people and their bureaucracy moves very slow. So there's certainly, it's a spectrum, right? There's places you can go that are better than others in terms of, but I think getting out of the U.S. certainly makes it more difficult for them to come after you.
And this is not legal advice, or this is not immigration advice.
Correct.
You might also be in a country where, the U.S. wants to extradite you, but you see, but we'll make that extradition go away if you just give us a little cash, which there's a lot. Yeah. And as you pointed out, a lot of these are places you really wouldn't want to go to. It's countries that don't, Edward Snowden ended up in Russia, and he's a Russian citizen now. That's not related to crypto, but it's a lot the same themes. And Julian Assange, oh my goodness. And what's really interesting about Roger was it's now an allegation of not declaring income when he gave up his citizenship, and so now they're trying to get back at him for tax evasion almost 10 years after giving. So you give up your citizenship and it doesn't even help. And another principle also to consider also is that some of these countries will not extradite their own citizens. I believe that's what at least helped Roman Polanski in Poland for a while.
Yes, that's a great point, Chris. That's the thing. If you're a citizen of a place, they're very unlikely to extradite their own citizens to another country. But for most of us crypto guys, it doesn't really help us unless we're able to establish, citizenship elsewhere and then just chill in that country. It's really hard for most people. Roger, because it's really expensive, for one, to renounce your U.S. citizenships, and it requires a bunch of attorneys and a bunch of help. It's not a cheap process. And then even if you do have a decent amount of money, then you get that exit tax, which is what they're claiming that Roger cheated on.
Yeah, they're claiming Roger cheated on that. I mean, something like 10 years later,
And this, just to be clear, this exit tax is completely an insane level of theft, right? Because All it is when you leave the country, they're claiming that you have to conduct a fake or a fictitious sale of your assets and then get taxed based on the fictitious, not real sale of those assets to pay your masters in the U.S. government. It is just absolutely insane. And just another note, the U.S. is one of the few countries that actually will chase you around the world trying to tax you if you remain a U.S. citizen. It's just nuts.
Yeah. If you're a French citizen, you come and work in the USA. France doesn't care about your income tax, but the U.S. does. I don't know if that will ever change. And that's really one of the measures of how free a country is how easy is it to leave the country. And America is actually, when you think about it, pretty hard to leave. It's for a lot of these reasons. You can't leave the tax system. Do you think Roger's prosecution is motivated by some of the stuff he's been saying, and hijacking Bitcoin and things like that?
Yeah, great question. So I'm going to say yes. I've heard, I forget the name. I just watched a YouTube with two attorneys, a YouTube channel talking about the case. I forget the name of it. If I find it, I'll send it to you. But it's that they said that the U.S. government, and I'm not surprised, and this is from my own experience, are extremely vindictive. Right? They're really vindictive, and if they see that you're making and we've seen this with IRS reports recently, if you make their quote unquote ability to govern more difficult, and how broadly they define that, they're going to make it personal and go after you personally. So it doesn't seem like a surprise to me that he published hijacking Bitcoin. And then he was also, another fact is, he was like right at the very end of the what is it called? Slipping my mind. The period where they could prosecute him. What's the term I'm looking for, Chris?
Statute of limitations.
Statute of limitations was almost up on his case, and I think 9 years is where he was at, and so it was just about to run up, and they arrest him right at the very end of that, right as he released the book, and they just happened to capture him in Spain too at the time. And the government has to go through quite a bit of hoops and spend quite a bit of money to extradite someone. There's a lot of resources involved in doing that. So I think this was politically motivated as much as it was just trying to look at the amount of money that the IRS didn't get. And these attorneys made the case that they're going to have a hard time actually prosecuting Roger, because the expatriation thing does make it more difficult. Even if he allegedly did lie about the amount of Bitcoins that he had, then there's an issue of how much were they actually worth anyway, because of the time period. There's a lot of variables in the case for sure. But I think, yes, I think it was politically motivated. I think they're vindictive. I think they hate what Roger stands for. And we saw this in Ross's case as well, right? With the judge, Catherine Forrester, bringing up the idea that the ideas are dangerous. It's like, no, you're dangerous. The government's what's dangerous.
Yeah, what do you think about some of the things that Aaron Day has been saying, and with central bank digital currencies? Do you think we're getting? He really thinks we're getting to a critical area here. I had Aaron Day on a while back, and do you think we're getting close to something like that? I mean, he's talked about some of the pilots and other things like that. He's really made a deep dive into this.
Yeah, that's like his primary focus. And I think he's right for being concerned about central bank digital currencies. I mean, 100% they're pursuing this avenue. And I think what Aaron's saying is that they're trying to clear a path in the U.S. by eliminating any kind of competition, any kind of privacy preserving tech, so they can make way for a CBDC. And I think this is also their way of salvaging the current state of the dollar, which is not great right now with the inflation rates and how much dollars are overseas, plus things like BRICS are happening where countries are looking at getting out from under the dollar. So having a safety valve or an exit strategy, like getting into CBDCs and thinking about another way of strategizing around how the U.S. has a functioning petrodollar, right, is through a CBDC, right? That's one of the exit strategies. So I don't think he's wrong, and we have seen programs by various banks trying to push this out. And I think this is happening around the world too. Other countries have looked into it. There's research studies going on. I can't think of any specific countries off the top of my head, but I do know that it's happening, and I do know that it's absolutely terrifying. And I wouldn't be surprised to see a push for the adoption of a CBDC at some point in the future. Aaron's definitely right about that.
Yeah, and it seems like to me it would also be used to control how you spend your money, and therefore control all of your behavior.
And it goes.
Yeah.
Sorry to interject. It goes perfectly tit for tat with what they did by hijacking Bitcoin, making Bitcoin useless as a currency. making it some state-controlled digital gold, and then pushing out a CBDC that will be a it won't even be a cryptocurrency in the way that we understand it. It won't be mineable, right? It'll be just those guys can still have a money printer. They can print out as much as they want. It'll be fully transparent, and they can surveil you very easily. It's absolutely terrifying. It's the most Orwellian and dystopic possible outcome for a currency a government could push. So that's.
But we also hear things, like Nigel Farage getting debanked. A lot of Russian immigrants or people who left Russia because they don't like Putin, having their credit cards or whatever canceled. Your ability to spend money, it's one of the things I found very troubling too was when maybe it was Estonia or EU was talking about we're now going to freeze all Russian assets and use those assets to pay off war crimes. I said, so even Russians living in your country who don't approve of Putin, which they likely don't approve of Putin. I mean, it's really all looking kind of scary in a lot of different ways here. I don't know where we get into this, how we get out of it, but it almost seems like you might be better off living somewhere that's maybe a little more backward. I mean, I go down to Mexico. There's still a whole lot of businesses that don't take credit cards at all. It's all pesos, cash, or they'll take American money if you give it to them. But it's still very much a cash society. So maybe you're better off going to a place that's, a little more backward than the U.S. or Western Europe. But it's hard to say.
Yeah. I think this is actually something. This is a good topic to kind of wind down on here with our call, because people want to hear solutions. We're kind of talking about all these bad things that are happening in the world, and people are asking, well, what can I do to get out of this? And we talked a little bit about it, right? By exiting the U.S. That's one. And I think that's the main one. But the beautiful thing is there's all this development that's happening right now. All these things that are happening that the government are doing, they have consequences, right? People are going to react against it. People wanting to use their money as they see fit and be private is not going to go away. So there's a lot of development, infrastructural development happening right now. One example is what those guys at Darkfire are doing, building peer-to-peer level privacy and anonymity enhancing technology that others can build on top of, so that you have on a base layer, on an infrastructural layer, privacy built into it. Most of the technologies that we have right now, especially in crypto, do not have privacy on the base layer. One of the few is Monero, and you see how terrified the government is of Monero because they have it. Yep, and they have all these exchanges delist it because it's so private. That's a sign that it's actually working and doing its job. But now we'll end up developing full infrastructure on the base level that has anonymity enhancing technology. It's going to be very difficult to actually be able to trace people like they have been doing, and it's going to hopefully the goal one day would invalidate all these blockchain forensics tools. I mean, Monero already does that. Some of these guys claim that they can search it out, but what's going to end up happening is that people are going to go to these digital areas or arenas where they can't be easily surveilled. They're going to exit the U.S. Right? We're already seeing human capital flight on a grand scale, I think, from the U.S. especially, because the way that I see it, I mean, we're us guys who work in crypto. This is a political witch hunt, right?
Yes.
So us being able to get out of this, dealing with this inquisition, is actually making us political refugees. And I think that's something that's really starting to form itself up. And I don't think this will last forever. Again, we can talk about this in another call that we do, Chris, at some point. But also what's happening is people are thinking about developing out network states, autonomous political organizations, and creating infrastructure for the development of ways that we can govern ourselves in different places around the world without having to worry about the state. So it's like this incremental erosion of state power that's occurring. But in the short time, you're right. What we do is we do our best to stay away from the U.S. if it's not possible for all of us. But doing that and also keeping our transactionality as cash-based as possible, or leveraging things like Monero and crypto, all of these are potential solutions in the short term.
Well, certainly, and I've sometimes said, maybe someday our nationality won't be a citizenship, but it'll be determined by what cryptocurrency we use. We'll have Ethereum Nation, Cardano Nation, Solana Nation, Dogecoin Nation. That's good. Yeah, and you've got a few conferences coming up. Like there's a Monero Con, and there's another one. You're over in Europe right now,
Yeah, in Prague next week. I'm going to be speaking at the Web3 Privacy Now Summit in Prague, and then a week after that, I'm going to be speaking at MoneroCon in largely a lot of the same topics we're talking about, especially around Samurai Wallet and Roger's case and this generalized attack on crypto privacy.
I haven't fully decided yet, but is there a possibility I might see you in Nashville in July too?
Is that going to be one of the Liberty
Bitcoin conference?
That's a possibility.
Yeah, I wonder why because I saw you at Miami Beach, so I wondered why they moved it to Nashville. So yes, that was I volunteered. That was a great way to go. It's such long lines at that conference. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next year. I think also, and also a lot of this stuff. Isn't all this stuff? If you have a big CBDC, isn't that also going to be targets for hackers and stuff like that too? There's a lot of things that could happen. It's I don't know where we go from here. But
it's just going to be one massive honeypot.
Yeah. Right. So, where can we find you on the net, Sterlin?
Yeah, sure. So my website, sterlinlujan.com.
Yes, that's Lujan, Lujan, Sterlin.
Right. And then on my Twitter profile is let me check it. I think it's at Sterlin Lujan as well.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes I have it backwards, but I think I'm just going to check real quick to make sure. Yeah, at Sterlin Lujan on Twitter. So that's where I'm most active, is on Twitter, and then I upload content as much as I can to my website.
Well, let's hope this works out. Sometimes it's there is a sunrise coming up, but you just don't know it's there yet. So please like the video, subscribe to the channel, go to my Substack, check it out, go buy my novel Escape from the Village. Thank you, Sterlin Lujan. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.